I remember the morning of 9/11. It was a beautiful sunny day. The Irish Times office was situated about 3 blocks from the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. And I was sitting at my desk working on an article on the downturn affecting restaurants in New York. It's one of my favourite topics. And I heard an enormous bang, and I looked out the window and I looked up and I saw this huge hole in the side of the North Tower, smoke and flames. And I knew that something terrible had happened and that people had been killed. But I thought it was a bomb. And as I sometimes do interviews for RTE, I called RTE and said, look, you might want to put me on air. There's been a terrible calamity here in New York. And I was put on to the 2 o'clock news headlines on 2FM. And before I went on, I heard the announcer saying, we've just had a news flash that a plane has hit the World Trade Center. And that was the first I knew it was a plane, actually. I then made a call to my colleague Paddy Smith, who was Washington correspondent, and said, Paddy, you should get up here. There's been a terrible disaster. And he was preparing to come up when, of course, another plane hit the Pentagon, and we knew then that we were into the biggest story of our lives. I was watching through my binoculars people who calling for help from the upper floors of the World Trade Center. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a second plane coming in across the Hudson River, and it smashed into the South Tower, and it sent this huge ball of flames and smoke out the other side of the building. And I remember thinking, this is an act of war. Up to then I thought perhaps this is a terrible accident, though it's how could a passenger plane crash into a tower that's so obvious on the skyline. I then began to talk regularly to RTE, describing what I had seen and what I was seeing. And at one point I left the building, which was quite close to the World Trade Center, and walked across to Vesey Street and West Side Highway, which is at the corner of the buildings. At this stage both of them were on fire, and bodies were falling, and I saw things that I never would want anybody to see. And at the same time I was very frightened. I knew that there was debris falling, burning, jet fuel was sprayed all over the place, there were cars burning around me, and I thought I'd better get back to the office, because I could see that buildings were being evacuated in the area. The police were just closing down everything, getting people out. And I thought, if I can't get back to my office, I won't be able to continue sending or filing stories to anybody. And I wouldn't be able to write my account for the Irish Times, which was the biggest story I'm going to ever cover. I went back to my office building. It was being evacuated, but luckily enough, the manager, who's a friend of mine, Rosie Rosenstein, married to a Cavan woman, he knew that I needed to be in the office on the 42nd floor, and he didn't tell the police there was still somebody in the building. So I was able to stay there all day, reporting on what happened, right outside my window. And incredibly, the phone lines in New York weren't working, the mobile phones weren't working, but the international lines continued to work. So I was able to continue giving accounts to RTE of what I was seeing, and I was able to file to the Irish Times an account of this attack on the World Trade Center. I recall too how difficult it was to write the story that day, because I knew that this was going to be a story of enormous impact, a story that people would refer to in future. It was the biggest story of my career, and I wanted to get it exactly right. And for weeks and weeks afterwards, I thought I hadn't risen to the occasion. Looking back now, I think it was okay, but it was extremely testing circumstances. And of course, late in the afternoon, I had to leave the building because the third World Trade Center tower collapsed. There's a 50-story tower that people forget about. And it collapsed about 5 o'clock, and that cut off the electricity to the building and cut off the international lines. And I had to make my way down 42 stories to the ground floor, carrying an overnight bag. And I remember thinking, and it was dark, thinking, what must it have been like in the World Trade Center for people going downstairs in the dark, but knowing that the building was about to crash down around them. I then had to find somewhere to set up an Irish Times office in New York. I managed to get a room in the W Hotel, And after a few days there, I got a note through the door saying, your bill has come to $5,000, please settle up immediately. And this was because I had to connect my computer to my laptop computer to the telephone system in the hotel, and of course those charges are enormous. So I went to see the manager. I told him the Irish Times office was now room number 405 and upstairs, and that if he continued to charge me so much for the telephone use, that would bankrupt the Irish Times. So he said, I won't let you leave the hotel until we agree on a fair price. And the final bill, I think, was about $7,000 or $8,000, and he took off $3,000. That sort of thing happened in New York in the few days after 9/11.